I saw them before they even entered the tavern. A woman with a face that looked like my worst hangover from the longest night of my life, and a guy who looked like he was carrying a load of other people's secrets. Their appearance made me grip my whiskey glass so tightly that it almost cracked. They weren't supposed to be here. Not tonight. And not in my small, forgotten town where I've been hiding for the last few years. When I came here a few years ago, I was sure that no one would be able to find me. It was a small, abandoned town, but there was something special about it, old signs, and people who knew each other so well that even a stranger like me became one of their own. I bought an old gas station with a garage, spent all the money I had left, and started from scratch. And although I was not the most successful businessman, I became a part of this city. But here's the thing, when you start to feel too comfortable, life always has to throw you a surprise. That night, I just wanted to drink my Jack Daniels and go home. But fate decided otherwise. A woman and a guy came up to the bartender, said something, showed me a photo, and I saw his face become surprised and uncertain. It was my sign. Tom, the bartender, looked at me and made the same expression that doctors make before giving a patient bad news. He nodded in my direction, and I realized they were looking for me. They didn't sit down. They didn't order anything. They just turned around and walked to the exit, but that wasn't enough for me. These two knew something, and it was something about me. Tom came up to me, wiping his hands on a towel, and whispered. "They've come for you. The woman is Lauren. She said someone named Tammy, she's dying. She wants to see you." My heart stopped. Dying how? Tammy. A name I've been trying to push out of my memory. I hadn't heard it in years. "There's more," Tom continued, leaning closer, "they're hiding something. They haven't told you everything. And I'm not sure you want to know." I laughed nervously and covered my face with my hands. "Tom, you always had a way of making my evening exciting." He didn't answer, just gave me the same look that doctors give their patients in the last moments of their lives. "What else did they say?" I asked, lighting a cigarette. Tom sat down across from me, and we both fell silent for a few seconds. "They said it was urgent," Tom finally said. "They said if you don't go to her, you might regret it for the rest of your life." I stared into my glass. They were gone, but it felt like they were still there. "Tammy never did anything without a reason," I said finally, exhaling the smoke. "If she wants to see me, it means she knows something important." Tom nodded, but didn't look away. His eyes were worried. "So what are you going to do?" he asked. I got up, threw a few crumpled bills on the table and left. If they think I'm just going to show up and listen to their excuses, they don't know me very well. But I really want to find out the truth. Somehow I don't care about anything else. What they are hiding is what can break me, or maybe save me. These two twin sisters thought I was gone forever. That I had simply erased myself from their lives. But the truth is that I was always watching. I always knew what they were doing, how they were living, and how they were telling stories about me, where I was the main villain. However, they never realized the biggest secret: I was never a fool. After that night in the tavern, when Tom told me about Tammy, I couldn't find a place to go. The last time I saw her, Lauren, and Tammy, they were laughing in my face. Their joke was simple: they thought I was a gold mine and they were going to drain me of every last cent. But fate loves irony. A few weeks before I left, I found an insurance policy in my name. Double indemnity in case of accidental death. $4 million. I guess I should have been more careful in the shower or while driving. That old fortune teller who lived on the edge of town once stopped me at a store. "Son, if you want to survive, run away." And I ran away. The truck was already packed. I took everything that was dear to me, a few photographs, my grandfather's old watch, and drove away without looking back. I always believed that Lauren's biggest mistake was not her betrayal, but her overconfidence. She really thought I would leave her everything. But I sold our businesses, canceled the credit cards, took my name off the accounts, and even signed the house over to her. "This is for you, darling," I said mentally, leaving the house keys on the kitchen table. The money ran out quickly. Lauren and Tammy tried to hang on, but the court froze their assets. My lawyer, a master of his craft, left them only a small piece of the pie, saying one phrase. This was never about money. It was about justice. But Lauren couldn't accept that. She refused to sign the final divorce agreement. We remained, officially divorced, but not legally. She hoped that I would break down, that I would come back. But I didn't come back. I controlled everything from afar. Important mail went to a rented FedEx box, and I received weekly reports. I knew their every move in advance. And now they found me, years later. But if they thought I would just get up and follow them, they were wrong. I walked out the back door of the tavern, looking back in case they were still watching. I got to my old pickup truck. "Are you Arthur?" a voice called out in the darkness. A young man stood in front of me in an iron shirt with a laptop under his arm. His face was serious and his eyes were inquisitive. "That depends on who's asking," I replied. "My name is Peter Edwards. I am the husband of your eldest daughter, Connie." I smiled bitterly. "Well, I hope she's not like her mother. I need to talk to you. It's important." We went to the old farmhouse. There I opened the safe and took out the documents. Peter was looking through them, his face tensing with each new letter. "She lied to you," he finally said, throwing the papers on the table. I picked up the bottle of whiskey and poured myself another shot. Peter handed me a letter from Lauren's lawyer. It turns out she refused to finalize the divorce without me being present. "Do you think Connie knows about this?" he asked. "You'll have to find out for yourself. But, believe me," I added, leaning closer, "what you find out next will make you wish you hadn't come to see me in the first place." The door closed behind Peter. This meeting raised more questions than it answered. One thing was clear: this was not just a family drama, it was a tangled web of lies, betrayal, and manipulation that had yet to be unraveled. Peter, the husband of my eldest daughter Connie, had told the truth. Perhaps too much truth for a man who grew up under the influence of Lauren and Tammy. But the words about Cynthia kept echoing in my head: "She wants to finalize the divorce." "Are you sure Tammy is really dying?" I asked Peter before he was about to leave. He shrugged his shoulders. "It's hard to say. If she's lying, it's a very elaborate game." "Does your wife know you're here?" I asked. Peter sighed heavily and took out his phone. "Let's find out right now." He pressed a few buttons and turned on the speakerphone. "Peter. What's going on?" "Connie, I have to ask you a question. Did you know your mother never signed the divorce papers?" An uneasy pause. "Mom said that Dad left us. That he took everything and disappeared. She said that if it wasn't for my stepfather, we wouldn't have survived." I silently slid a bottle of Budweiser over to Peter and opened it for him. "Your mother sounds like a pretty good writer," I muttered. Peter sighed and turned off his phone. "Something's not right here," he said, "and the more I find out, the more I have doubts." I got up from my chair and walked over to the window. "Do you think Lauren and Tammy planned all this?" I asked. "I don't know," he replied, "but it looks like a well-planned operation." Peter pulled several papers out of his backpack and placed them in front of me. They were financial reports, documents from the insurance company, and letters. One of them was addressed to me. "How did you get this?" I looked up at him. "Through an investigation. The accident a few months ago. It led me to you." "Does Connie know you found me?" "No," he said firmly. "She thinks I'm just working a case." "Why didn't you tell her?" "Because I don't know who I can trust." We sat in silence, each with our own thoughts. Then Peter took out his phone and called Connie again. "Connie, you have to talk to Aunt Tammy. She knows more than she's letting on." "Aunt Tammy? We hardly ever talk to her." "That's exactly why. She was there when this whole thing started. She might know key details." Their conversation ended. I walked over to the cabinet, pulling out 2 more bottles of beer. "Did you ever think your life could turn into a cheap detective novel?" I muttered as I sat down at the table. "Every day," Peter answered, and we both smiled weakly. But our smiles quickly faded. "Peter, be careful," I said quietly. "Lauren and Tammy have always been masters at manipulation. They won't stop until they get what they want." I realized that. He stood up, we shook hands, and he headed for the exit. But before he left, he turned around and said, I'll let you know if I find out anything. And, take care of yourself. After Peter left, I decided to do something important. I took out my old laptop and started looking through the archives I had kept for years. Among the piles of papers and letters, I found one document that surprised me greatly, an insurance policy with Lauren's signature, dated a few days before my escape. I knew it was just beginning. Peter's words kept echoing in my head, "Tammy wants to finalize the divorce." But what did that really mean? And what other trap have they set for me this time? I sighed, finished the rest of the whiskey, and turned off the office lights. It was time to go home. My truck was moving slowly, thoughts of Lauren and Tammy and what they had gotten Connie into swirling in my head. I turned into my driveway and saw a light in the window. Jody was cooking dinner, and her silhouette, illuminated by the kitchen lights, looked so familiar and calm that I momentarily forgot about everything that was happening around me. As soon as I walked into the house, my two little ones, 3-year-old Max and 4-year-old Amy, rushed to meet me, wrapping their arms around my legs. I picked them up, spinning them in the air while they laughed like little engines. "Dad, you smell," Max wrinkled his nose. "Like an old car engine," I suggested. "Yes," he exclaimed, and Amy nodded her head. Jody looked out of the kitchen and smiled. "Dinner is almost ready." Dinner was as warm and homely as ever. Jody talked about the store, about new customers and problems with suppliers. I listened to her voice, but my mind wandered far away. "What's wrong?" she finally asked. I tried to smile, but it came out crooked. Jody didn't push me further. She knew I would speak when I was ready. After dinner, I helped put the kids to bed. When they finally fell asleep, I went out on the porch where my beloved Jody was waiting for me. She was holding a couple of bottles of beer. "No whiskey tonight, I think," she said, handing me one. "Fair enough." We sat in silence, looking at the night sky. "You know, Arthur, I can always feel when something is wrong," she said, not taking her eyes off the stars. "I know." It took me a while to tell Jody how much she meant to me. She came into my life when I was on the brink. Her grandmother once asked me to help her. Jody was 10 years younger, and she was running away from a bad marriage. I came to her town in a rented truck to help her move. Her ex-husband was a psychopath, and her grandmother was afraid for her life. "How did you not get scared then?" she once asked me. "Did you see me in the mirror? Who would have dared to contact me?" She laughed out loud then. The few days we spent together after she moved in laid the foundation for everything that followed. She took over my store and turned it into a profitable business. Her honesty and hard work earned her the respect of even the most stubborn local customers. But her past did not disappear. Jody's ex-husband found her. He managed to scare her a few times, but I quickly blocked all paths to her. At some point, when things finally started to get better, I noticed that Jody started wearing a diamond ring. It was fake, but she was using it as protection from unnecessary questions. "Arthur, what if someone wants to check this stone one day?" she asked once. "You'll tell them I bought it at Walmart at a discount." She laughed then. One evening we were celebrating the end of her divorce. In a local bar, with slow music, we kissed for the first time. It was so natural, as if our whole lives had been leading up to this moment. But the past came back to haunt us. Jody's ex-husband had found her contact. This information hurt me, but I didn't say anything to her that night. I simply decided that I would no longer let the past rule my life. Today, looking at Jody, I felt grateful for everything she brought to my life. The kids loved her, and I didn't know if I deserved the chance. "Whatever happens, we'll get through it," she said, as if reading my mind. When we got back to the house, Jody's phone rang. She picked it up and I immediately realized it was her grandmother. "What did she say?" I asked when she hung up. "Connie was at her place. She found out that the annuities you left for your children never reached them." Another lie from Lauren and Tammy. I had to get back at them somehow. I stood by the window, looking out at the road. I went back to my desk and pulled out my laptop. A page with old documents appeared on its screen: financial reports, insurance policies, bank transactions. Everything I had accumulated over the years. The debt collection service had already tried to find me several times. The postman who delivered the last warning to me couldn't help but laugh when he read the contents of the letter: abandonment of family, unpaid alimony, financial irresponsibility. It was funny and painful at the same time. Arthur, the man who had left everything to save his own life, now looked like a criminal in their eyes. Jody, who was sitting next to me and looking through the documents, stopped her gaze on one sheet. "Look at this." I moved closer. On the paper was a financial report with Lauren's signature. The amount of $48,000 withdrawn from the accounts intended for my children. Peter was right, I said, staring at the numbers. They took the kids' money. Peter and his team have already started an investigation. My former lawyer's death no longer looked like an accident. His office burned down the same night he received new documents for the case. But I had a feeling it wasn't over yet. "If this is true," Jody said quietly, "Lauren and Tammy are looking at up to 10 years in prison." "They won't go to jail," I said with a sigh, "they're too cunning for that." That night, Jody and I sent all the information to the district attorney. Every file, every document, every record was carefully reviewed and sent on. "It's a trap," I said after a few hours of silence. "What do you mean?" Jody looked up at me. "They want me to come back. This whole trial is just bait." On Monday, Jody's lawyer called and confirmed our suspicions. Lauren and Tammy officially sued me. But this was no ordinary case. It was a carefully planned scenario to trap me. On Friday morning, Jody received a call from Graham. "We are leaving tonight. We'll be at your place on Saturday. They already suspect something." That was our sign. I closed the store for the weekend, and Jody got the house ready for the guests. At 7 p.m., we saw 2 cars pull into the driveway. My heart was pounding as if it was going to jump out of my chest. "That's them," I said, squeezing Jody's hand. She squeezed my hand in return, and we stepped out into the yard. Karen was the first to get out of the car, her face wet with tears. She rushed to me and hugged me tightly. "Daddy," she said through her tears. Connie, who was holding the baby in her arms, came a little slower. Peter walked beside her, his arm around his wife's shoulder. "It's so good to see you," I muttered as I hugged my daughters. Dinner that night was like a festive banquet. Beef shoulder, mashed potatoes, hot apple pie. My family was gathered around the table, and it was strange and perfect at the same time. "Dad," Peter said after dinner, "we think the car that hit your lawyer might be connected to Tammy." Peter explained that traces of paint were found at the scene of the accident that matched Tammy's car. "If this is confirmed, she will be charged with manslaughter." "They thought they had gotten rid of all the evidence," I whispered. Jody sat silently, wiping away her tears. "I always thought you were just paranoid, Arthur," she said, "but now I see you were right." "They want to lure me out," I said. "They think that if I appear in court, they can pull off another scam." We sat for a long time discussing the plan of action. Josie handed me the keys to her old house and some important documents. "You can't go back, Dad," Connie said, "it's a trap." "I have to go back," I replied. "Otherwise they will never stop." Suddenly, Peter got up from his seat and went outside to make some calls. I looked at my daughters. Then I looked at Peter, who was scribbling something quickly in his notebook. "Dad, if you can come to town on Wednesday," Peter continued, "rent a truck and show up in a few prominent places. Let everyone see you." "So I'm supposed to be the bait?" "Exactly," Peter spoke clearly and calmly. "If you're in plain sight, Lauren will have to communicate from the prison. And then we'll be able to track who she's in contact with." Jody, who had been listening in silence, finally spoke up. "You're going to use the father of my children as bait. What is wrong with you?" I put my hand on her shoulder. "It's okay, Jod. We know what we're doing." She looked at me, her eyes glistening with tears and anger. "You're still going to do it even if I say no, right?" "Yes," I answered simply. Josie, who was sitting next to me, sighed and said, "Arthur never asks anyone to do anything he wouldn't do himself. He knows what he's doing. If he were a boxer, he would have gotten a championship belt a long time ago," Jody muttered. I smiled out of the corner of my mouth, but it wasn't a joke. Later that night, Peter and I were sitting on the porch. "Jody's ex-husband is going to find out I'm in town," I said. And well, be ready for that, Peter replied, but there's one more thing. If Lauren finds out you're here, she'll try to pass the information on through someone in prison. On Thursday morning, I drove up to the old town in a rented U-Haul. The "Welcome to Paradise" sign looked as if it had been painted for the last time before I escaped. I drove slowly, looking around the familiar streets. The city had changed little, new asphalt on the main road and a few closed shops. Everything else looked like time had stopped here. I stopped at an old cafe, Bob and Betty's Burger House. A place where I used to spend hours drinking coffee and talking with friends. I got out of the truck and headed for the door. Inside, the smell of fried burgers and coffee, the smells of the past. I sat down at one of the corner tables and waited for the waitress. "What are you having for lunch today?" I asked. "Wednesday, meatloaf, mashed potatoes, beans," she replied. "Tell Jack that Arthur wants meatloaf with brown gravy and fried onions." She raised an eyebrow as if I had just asked her to carry the golden throne into the kitchen. "Leave it," I said, standing up. "I'll tell him myself." I walked through the revolving door to the kitchen, and the waitress ran after me. "Jack!" I shouted, and the middle-aged man turned to me. He froze for a second and then smiled broadly. "You old fool. You came early." We hugged and he called his wife to join us. We sat in the kitchen drinking coffee and talking about everything, life, old times, and of course Lauren and Tammy. "Jack," I said, "something important is going to happen tomorrow. If everything goes according to plan, Lauren and Tammy will never hurt any of us again." "Have you thought this through?" he asked. "Not quite. But we have a plan, and it's starting to work. Take care of yourself, Arthur. There are people here who still remember you." I nodded and stood up. As I walked out, several pairs of eyes followed me. Someone picked up the phone, someone whispered something into a neighbor's ear. "Everything is going according to plan," I muttered as I got into the truck. "The next few days will be crucial. One wrong step and everything will fall apart, but if we do everything right, this story will end once and for all." When I crossed the threshold of the old cafe and then saw a familiar car in the parking lot. Tammy's. "It's going to be a long day," I muttered as the cafe door opened and Tammy walked in. I continued to sit at my table as if I wasn't there. But she knew. She always knew. "You should have stayed in the shadows, Arthur," she hissed, stopping next to my table. "And you should have been a better liar, Tammy," I replied, not looking up from my coffee cup. Tammy's appearance threw everyone off balance. But it was Lily who surprised me the most. My younger sister. She entered the cafe a few minutes after Tammy. She looked like she had seen a ghost. You're really here," she whispered before rushing to me and hugging me tightly. "It's okay, Lily," I said, trying to calm her down. "Are you here because of Lauren?" she asked. "Yes, but it's a lot more complicated than that." Jack nodded toward Tammy, who was still standing by the door. "She's up to something," he whispered. Tammy came closer and sat down on the edge of the table. "Arthur, I'm not here to fight. We need to talk, like adults," she said. "I wonder when the last time we did that," I replied with a wry smile. Tammy ignored my remark. "Lauren was arrested. She's in custody. And if you don't sign the deal, it will end in disaster for all of us." "Disaster?" I asked again. "You mean it will end in disaster for you and your sister?" Tammy didn't answer. "Tammy," I finally said, "if you think I'm going to sign anything that will help you get away with this, you're wrong." Tammy exhaled, then leaned closer and whispered. "Arthur, you have no idea what you've gotten yourself into." "It doesn't matter anymore," I replied. Tammy stood up and left the cafe, slamming the door loudly. After she left, Jack sat down with us. "She's broken," he said, "but broken people are the most dangerous." "We know that, Jack," I replied. "But we also know that the truth is already on our side." Lily took a deep breath. "What happens next?" she asked. "I'm going to go to my daughter Josie's house," I answered. We left the cafe and walked to the truck. On the way, we continued to talk. "Josie wants to be closer to Connie and the kids," I said. "You and Jody. You've been together for 5 years?" Lily asked, smiling slightly. "Yeah, I answered. I never would have guessed. But you make a great couple. I smiled back. We arrived at Josie's house in the late afternoon. The garage door was ajar, and I was worried. The curtains are closed, I whispered. Josie always leaves them open. I pulled out my phone and sent a message to Peter. The curtains are closed. Is this normal? The answer came quickly. The police might have closed them. All clear. I cautiously entered the house. It was quiet inside. Too quiet. Arthur, I heard a voice from the darkness. I turned my head and saw a police officer. He handed me the phone. Peter wants to talk to you. I picked up the phone. Hello. Arthur, we intercepted a conversation between Lauren and Tammy. They think they know where you are. And they've already sent someone to your location. How long do I have? I asked. An hour. Maybe less, Peter replied. I put the phone down and started to act. Everything in the house had to be packed as soon as possible. At 6:30 in the evening, a pizza delivery arrived at the house. The driver knocked on the door and asked, "Are you moving?" "No, I'm just helping a friend," I answered, handing him the money. He left, but the feeling of anxiety did not disappear. Somewhere in the darkness, I heard the sound of a car engine stalling in the driveway. My heart was pounding. The door creaked slightly as it opened. A figure in the darkness slipped into the kitchen, a pistol clutched tightly in his hand. There I sat, under the dim light of the lamp, a cup of coffee in one hand and a pack of cigarettes in the other. "Hey, Art," Brad said, his voice calm, but his fingers trembling a little on the grip of the gun. "Lauren and Tammy say hi." I set my cup down and looked directly at him. "If that's greetings, they could have sent a postcard," I said with a wink. Brad did not smile. "I'm sorry, Brad, but you've come to the wrong place," I replied, leaning back. "Do you really think I'd say something like that to you, the men who probably set fire to my lawyer's office?" His eyes narrowed, but he didn't answer. "Tell me, Brad, how much did they promise you?" "4 million from the insurance policy," I asked. He nodded slowly. "No," I said, smiling, "they cheated you. The most you could have gotten was 750,000. Lauren and Tammy never really shared." They said I'd get my share," he mumbled. "They lied to you, Brad, and you know it. They used you as a pawn. You're nothing to them. Tell me, Brad, what does your instinct tell you?" "They're going to set you up when it comes down to the wire. You're expendable to them." "What do I do?" he finally asked. "Put the gun down. Call the police. Tell them everything you know." "You can make a deal," I said. He hesitated, but then slowly put the gun on the table. "Do it now," I said, nodding to the phone. He dialed the number. A few minutes later, there was a knock on the door. I opened it and 2 uniformed officers stood on the threshold. They handcuffed Brad and took him to the car. "Hell, tell us everything," one of the officers said as they led Brad down the hall. I smoked a cigarette and sat down on a chair. My heart was beating so hard that it seemed like it was about to jump out of my chest. Peter called me almost immediately after the arrest. "You did well, Art," he said. "Brad confessed to everything. We have the tapes, the testimony, everything we need to charge Lauren and Tammy." "What's next?" I asked. "Then we go after them." "But it's not over yet," he replied. The next morning I woke up to a knock on the door. It was Lily and Connie. "Dad, Brad told us everything," Connie said. "They thought the insurance would kick in even after the liquidation. But it doesn't." "Your hunch was right." I nodded, feeling the tension ease a little. Lily looked at me and said, "You really risked everything, Art. They could have killed you." "But they didn't," I replied, smiling. I hugged them both and said, "Now it's up to Peter. He has to finish the job." Jod arrived a few hours later. She got out of the car and rushed to me. Her face was crying, but happy. "You promised you wouldn't take any risks," she said, punching me in the shoulder. "And I kept my promise," I replied, pulling her to me. We spent the whole day together. Jack came from the restaurant and brought us lunch. We sat at the big table, laughed, cried, and for the first time in a long time I felt real peace. "What now?" asked Lily. "Now we wait," I answered. "But believe me when I say, this is not over. They will make their last move, and it will be the most dangerous." The sun was setting over the horizon. We were sitting in the living room, surrounded by mountains of boxes, coffee cups, and papers. Jody was trying to sort the children's toys. Connie was saying something to Peter. The door opened and Peter came in. His face was pale, his eyes red from lack of sleep. "Lauren and Tammy are in custody right now," he said in a hoarse voice. "And you wouldn't believe how far it went." I raised my eyebrows, Jody froze, and Connie sat on the edge of the couch. "They didn't just want you dead, Art," Peter continued, "they've been plotting this for years. The death of the lawyer, the manipulation of your divorce, the fake documents, it was all part of the same big plan." Jody looked at me in horror. "And now what?" she asked. "The judge is working on expediting the case," Peter said. "If all goes according to plan, your divorce will be finalized by the end of the week." "I mean," Jody began, but fell silent, swallowing the lump in her throat. I walked over to her, took her hand, and said, "This means that we can finally be officially together. And I promise you that no one will ever be able to separate us again." Tears glistened in her eyes, but she smiled. "You'll have to buy me a ring," she said jokingly. "I'm on my way," I replied with a wink. That evening we had dinner. It was an evening full of conversation, memories, and hugs. Jody told my family how I had saved her from a toxic marriage. Connie bragged about her young son, and Peter, despite his fatigue, still joked and encouraged us. "You do know how to find a way out of even the most difficult situations," my mom said, pouring me more coffee. "I've just always been stubborn," I replied, smiling. After dinner, my father invited Peter and me to his office. He closed the door and sighed. "Boys," he said seriously, "I'm not young anymore, and I can't help you as much as I used to. But I know one thing, if you give Lauren and Tammy the slightest chance, they will destroy you both." I nodded. "They won't get a chance, Dad," I said. The next day, Peter and I went to a jewelry store. I picked out an elegant set of rings for Jod, and Peter picked out a gift for Connie. "Are you sure she's going to say yes?" he asked as we were walking back home. "If she wanted to say no, she would have done it by now," I answered, smiling. In the evening, the house was full of people. Connie was trying to organize the kids, and Jody was sitting quietly on the couch, not even knowing what was coming. I stood up, walked over to her and, getting down on one knee, opened the velvet box. "Jod, I've come a long way to get to this moment. You were always there for me when I was at my worst. You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. Will you agree to spend the rest of your life with me?" She covered her face with her hands and whispered, "Yes." The whole house burst into applause and laughter. My parents were crying, Connie was taking pictures. "Don't think you can avoid the wedding now," Peter said with a wink. "Oh, I wasn't planning on it," I replied. The next few days were like a dream. We got our marriage license, Jod picked out a dress and I picked out a suit. The wedding took place in my parents' backyard. It was a simple but incredibly happy day. Jod and I took our vows under a sunny sky, surrounded by those we love. During the toast, my father raised his glass and said, "Today I see my son as he was always meant to be. Strong, confident and happy." Jod squeezed my hand under the table. But even in that perfect moment, I felt it wasn't over. Lauren and Tammy were in custody, but they hadn't lost yet. Something told me they would make one last attempt. My former father-in-law approached me holding a small white envelope. His eyes seemed to see more than he wanted to say. "Art," he said, handing me the envelope, "this is not a gift. This is yours by right. Your early inheritance. The rest of my estate will go to your daughters." His voice was calm, but there was a heaviness behind it. I thanked him, stuck the envelope in my inside jacket pocket, and decided not to open it until better times. Everyone was having fun, and even my daughters looked happy and carefree. We were dancing, laughing, taking pictures, and trying to forget about everything that had happened. But somewhere deep inside me, like a dull bell, a warning was sounding, this is not the end. "Where are you going on your honeymoon?" someone asked Jod as we sat at the table holding hands. "After everything we've been through," she replied, smiling, "our honeymoon will be a week in Florida and a week in California. We want to spend time with our children. Because without them and without our family, we would never have gotten here." Her words drew applause, and I noticed Peter nodding his head as if he understood. The next morning, while everyone was still sleeping, I opened the envelope. Inside was a bank check for $100,000 and a short note. "Thank you for helping to restore justice. I always suspected that the twins were responsible for their mother's death. This world has a way of punishing the guilty. May this money bring you and your family peace." I just sat there for a few minutes with this note in my hands. Everything that had happened seemed too unbelievable. Jod and I decided not to tell anyone about the envelope. She carefully put it in her purse and said, "The past must stay in the past." I nodded. We packed up, loading the last of the boxes into the rented van. "It's over," Jod whispered, leaning against my shoulder. "Almost," I replied. On the way home, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still unresolved. But when we arrived at our house, I was relieved. Our children ran inside, and Jod and I followed them, carrying the last of our bags. "This house," she began, "is finally ours," I finished. Late at night, after the kids were asleep, we sat on the porch listening to the crickets sing. "Do you think they'll come back?" Jod asked. I wondered. Lauren and Tammy had always been masters of intrigue. But now they are in the hands of justice. If they have something else planned, we're ready. But the twins' plans were far more insidious than I could have imagined. The next morning I received an anonymous letter. "Art, do you think it's over? You don't even know half of what we have planned. I hope you sleep well at night. Because soon you're going to realize it's not over." My hands shook. Jod came into the room and noticed my face. "What's wrong?" "Nothing," I answered, shoving the letter into my pocket. I walked out into the yard, breathing in the night air. Lauren and Tammy may have been behind bars, but their influence still stretched far beyond the prison walls. But now I had a family. I had love. And I was ready to fight to the end.